Hello, I'm Charmaine Marlowe. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni, Employer Collaborations and Projects at Western Sydney University. And welcome to the second session of our Skills Activate series, Effectively Managing Workplace Relationships. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands in which we all meet today. I pay respect to all elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Indigenous people joining us. I'm a Western alum, and I'm so proud to be part of this series and initiatives like this that Western are offering our alumni. It's an objective of the alumni team to be offering lifelong careers education, and that's exactly why we've put a series like this together. So I hope you're enjoying it, and if you are, please let us know. We will be sending out an evaluation at the end of the entire series, so we really want to get your feedback. But I will stop talking and I will introduce our presenter tonight. So it's my pleasure to introduce Graham Hill. Graham has been coaching senior leaders and their teams for over 18 years. Graham has coached in a broad range of large organisations, including AMP, the Hilton Hotel Group, and our very own Western Sydney University. And tonight we are so excited for him to share his expertise with us. So over to you, Graham.
Thank you, Charmaine, and hello, everyone, and happy evening. I guess my background is I'm obviously I'm 58 now, so I've got a few years under my belt. In a way, I've worked in HR, I've worked in operations, I've worked in a whole range of areas. But my sort of second career or third career has been in coaching, and I've got a master's degree of organisational coaching through Sydney University, so don't boo and hiss at me, and work obviously, as Charmaine said, a lot at the University of Western Sydney. So what I wanted to, I guess, explore with you guys today is sharing a little bit, I guess, about my experiences in the workplace around effective relationships in the workplace. I wanted to give you some observations, I guess, and also some observations around some of the challenges I see in the workplace in creating effective relationships, and also near the end, some solutions. I guess the thing for me is that I've only got 45, 50 minutes with you. The work that I do very much is getting to understand people's workplace and how their workplace works. And once I get an understanding of that, some of the applied information, some of the information that I'm going to talk about today becomes much more applied. So I'm hoping that there will be some things that you can take away that are applicable, but it might be something that you come back at with some of this material and have a think about it again. So the slides that we're going to go through today will be made available to you. So I wanted to start with the more complex side of, I guess, workplace relationships. A lot of the things we do are linear and binary, and they're fairly easy. So you can basically work out, if you do this, then this is going to happen. What I want to focus more on today is the concept of VUCA, and introduce, I guess, the framework around VUCA. Has anyone, if you've got sort of chat open, has anyone heard of the term VUCA? If you can just give me a bit of a thumbs up or thumbs down in the chat, please, just out of curiosity. Yep. Nope. Nope. Okay. Nope. Okay. No. All right. Okay. Wow. Okay. That's interesting. So VUCA is an acronym, and it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And our experiences now in contemporary society are in our workplaces, our home lives, and just generally in the media, there is a lot of volatility, there is a lot of uncertainty, there is more complexity, and there is a lot of ambiguity. The problem is that it's actually messing with our minds. Our minds are not terribly well built to be upset. And what I mean by upset, I mean that the more we find it difficult to predict what's going to happen, the more anxious and the more concerned we get. So in many of our workplaces now, there's a hell of a lot more VUCA than ever before. And the higher you go and the more senior you become, the more experience you'll get of this particular phenomena. So in many ways, as I said, we're not really built for this level of confusion that this puts forward, puts us in. So for me, what happens in VUCA is that in order to use this or to become more adapted into the space of VUCA, there's a series of things that we need to now become much more engaged in and aware of as individuals. The level of self-awareness that we need to build and have is significantly higher than before. In line with that, the more aware you are of yourself, the more you can regulate yourself. So self-discipline becomes a critical skill and key skill. The corollary to that is also being other aware. So being aware of other individuals and how they're aware as well. The fourth area is systems awareness, being able to read as a leader, a manager, or even just an operator in a business or a participant in the business, being able to read and be aware of systems, how groups work, how teams work, and that lovely word, how politics works. And when I talk about politics, I'm talking about how power works in organizations and how authority works. And finally, if you're a manager and or a leader or a supervisor, then you're actually in charge of regulating systems, both human and technical systems. Today, I'm going to be really talking about how you read and how you use and how you take advantage of human systems. The problem is that all of that stuff, I could spend, 3, 4, 5 years with the senior leader working in each of those spaces. And they require a heck of a lot of effort. It doesn't come naturally to be self-aware. It certainly doesn't come natural to be systems aware and be able to understand how systems work. So I want to give you a little bit of an insight into how that works today. I guess in VUCA, in order to create these relationships that we need, we're all aiming, I guess, in our workplace to create environments that are what I term cooperative. In other words, we're able to get things done with and through other people. Therefore, in VUCA, we need to be mindful, I think, of both what's happening inside us and also what's happening outside us. A lot of people will talk to you and say, look, like, what are you thinking? That's a lovely thing, but also we need to be paying attention, not just to what we're thinking, but how we're thinking and why we're thinking. And I'll go into a little bit more detail of that later. So thinking well and understanding how you think and how others think is now becoming a critical part of creating an effective and successful relationships. As humans, we're blessed with the ability to think about our thinking. We are quite reflective. And if you look at, you may well have heard of things like IQ, EQ. IQ is pure intellect. EQ is emotional intelligence. There's SQ, which is social intelligence, the ability to read social situations. And then there's a new one that we've invented, a colleague and I, called RQ, which is being able to build a reflective practice as well and being able to have a reflective capability. So we can think about our thinking. The trouble is we don't do it very often. So in order to do this as well, we need to be able to, as I said, if we are understanding how we think, we also need to be able to understand how other people think, and thinking well together is a focus that we need to work on. So a lot of this stuff is coming out of a whole range of science and arts-based places. I leverage all of the work I do off referable material. So the neuroscience is starting to really get an understanding of how our mind works, how the body works, how the body and the mind works, how embodied cognition works, and a whole range of stuff. It's now starting to blend in with psychology, with philosophy and sociology and anthropology. And there's a lot of cross-disciplinary conversation conversation and thinking going on, which is enriching our ability to understand the problem of being human. So it also is highlighting just how difficult it can be and how much effort it is required to create helping relationships between humans. So again, what I hope to do tonight is give you a very, very quick tour of some of the ideas that I use in my coaching practice and the way that I help to educate leaders. There's two sort of phenomena that I think you may or may not be all aware of that I believe kind of infect the way that we are. We're quite an anxiety-driven species, and I'm not talking here about anxiety at a clinical level. I'm not talking about people who might have some kind of need for medical intervention anxiety. I'm talking about bog standard normal anxiety, because anxiety is a very, very normal part of being human, and we're actually an anxiety-sensitive species, because anxiety performs a beautiful task or a beautiful function of keeping us cautious, vigilant, and concerned. So without anxiety, we wouldn't have the availability to pay attention and be aware and be curious. It was more useful, though, in times gone by to get us out of unsafe situations. The problem now is that sometimes our anxiety is over-reading or overstimulating our minds to make sense of things too quickly or making a lot of assumptions. And unfortunately, from anxieties to assumptions to fear, and once we're locked into the way that we think about something, it's quite difficult for us to change the way that we're thinking. So another key human phenomena is empathy. And again, this has been sort of clinically defined in a way, and it was sort of the new black for a long time around empathy in the workplace being very, very important. And it is, but I think for me, it's the way that I look at empathy is the ability it helps us to increase our perspective taking capability. So in other words, it'll help us to see things from multiple viewpoints. And I use that word viewpoint rather than point of view. And if it's a point of view, I own it, where if it's a viewpoint, I'm looking at it and using it. So it helps us to increase decision-making quality. With the beauty about empathy and anxiety together, one can override the other, but actually empathy can help regulate anxiety. In other words, what I'm saying is that if you can see things from other people's perspectives, that might just calm down your anxiety. But I'll show you a little bit later why that simple formula doesn't quite work very well either. And I think that the concept of empathy, in my opinion, has kind of been misused. You know, you may or may not have heard of people talking about walking in someone else's shoes. I'm a big believer that they have their own shoes, that they're their shoes and they should be walking in their shoes, not us. So if we're going to use empathy well, it's about walking beside people, near them, not in their shoes, because the more and more we walk with people and hear and listen to them, the more likely we are to understand them. This is a complicated slide, so I'm going to take a bit of time. The next two slides, there's a lot of information in them, but I think they're important in articulating just how important it is to be self-aware and how critical it is to be self-regulated as well. Our minds actually can be quite problematic. This particular set of research that I'm quoting here is by a lady called Jennifer Garvey-Berger. And the premise of her work is basically that anxiety, or our primal instincts, are interfering with our ability to see how we're thinking, not just what we're thinking. So the mind has a tendency to trap itself in 5 mind traps. First mind trap is the mind trap of making things simple. So a lot of people who might be more inclined to conspiracies or joining the dots too quickly might be trapped in creating simple stories. And of course, simple stories are useful in a way because they help us to momentarily make sense of something. But then if we don't expand our simple storytelling into something different and enrich that through conversation, then it's going to stay as a simple story. And you may or may not see this in yourself. I can certainly see myself in all of these traps. And depending on how functional and dysfunctional your mind is at the time, you may well have a favorite one or two of these. Or sometimes if you're in a really tricky place, you may well be practicing all of these mind traps at the same time. Or you may well have a boss that manifests some of these from time to time. So the second one is someone who's trapped by rightness. And by being trapped by rightness, there's this sense that I can't actually move my thinking from beyond the position I currently am taking. And it's there for a reason, because evolutionary, we were hell-bent on making things as certain and simple as we possibly could to get out of danger and also to hunt down that saber-toothed tiger we needed to kill off, or that antelope we needed to kill for food. So it's kind of like it's our binary mind. It's the left-right mind. Very, very helpful part of being human, and we get a dopamine hit when we're right, because it gives us a sense of our own sort of self-belief. We can also be trapped by agreement. You may or may not have heard of the concept of in crowds, out crowds, or even in organization, it's the engineers that are the problem. It's not us in finance, or it's not finance of the problems, it's marketing of the problems. So it's just another way of us tribalizing our workplace and working out whether they're on our side or not on our side. So it helps us to I guess, create social difference, and also helps us, if we can overcome it, to create social connection. Trapped by control, which is another kind of mindset where you think that you're in control. There may well be some parents or some people that have had situations where they actually know that they're jolly well not in control, or those experiences. I certainly, as I become older, I've realized that control is something that I can put controls in place, which help me to make sense of things, but there's very little that I can control. So again, if you're trapped by control, there's the illusion that what you do is going to change a system, which is probably not going to be terribly accurate. Then the last one is trapped by ego. So if you are hell-bent on promoting your self-identity and who you are above anything else, then the ego can trap you in your own sort of space, and you again will have no perspective. So you can see, if we have a tendency to be trapped in one or a number of those, being aware of how those might work in us and being able to think about your thinking and see if you're falling foul of some of those can be a very, very, very valuable part of opening yourself up to the relationships you're trying to foster. You can see, I guess, from a destructive perspective, if a manager or a leader is trapped in all 5 of those mind traps, they're going to be an extremely difficult person to work for. So you can see how harmful this could be in a case where someone has power and authority. The next slide is really now going to talk a little bit more about what I call adult development theory. And adult development theory comes out of the 1960s, out of a guy called Piaget's work, where he looked at child mind developments. And since then, a whole range of work has kind of fallen off the back of that work. And the model that we like and use is this model by a lady called Susan Cook-Greuter. And her philosophy, or her methodology, or a way that she explains the mind, is that it goes through a series of development stages from the bottom of this slide to the top. And when we are building our minds, there are certain points in our careers and our lives that we get the opportunity to expand outwards, but also upwards. And as you grow your mind up, the particular model that's in front of you, that doesn't necessarily mean that you lose the step before. It just becomes more manageable because you're more aware of it. So the thing that happens as you move up through this model is you become more and more aware of the mindset that sits below that. However, under extreme circumstances of high levels of anxiety and low levels of empathy, we will get restricted to the lowest point of our thinking capability. So if you look at the bottom section there, she calls that particular section the opportunist mind. The opportunist mind often has a lot of the human pathological behaviors in there. So any of the nasty kind of, psychopath, sociopath, some of the narcissistic behaviors, some of those kind of things would potentially sit in a fully grown adult if they were operating out of that opportunist mind. But if you think about it from a child perspective, it's actually something that a child has to work through as a stage piece, because as a very small child, they actually are interested in their own immediate needs for food, for sleep, for being loved and cuddled and et cetera, et cetera. So the opportunist mind tends to think about their own immediate needs and the opportunities for their own self-protection and self-interest. And unfortunately, there are people in the world and people in the workplace that can and do manifest that type of thinking. Then we kind of go to kindergarten and we learn to be a social animal, and we learn to work out what the rules are and when morning tea is. And we like to know what the rules are because the rules help keep us safe. There are people in the workplace that have quite diplomat-based minds. They're the type of people that are the workhorses. They just do their job. They come in, they don't make too much of a fuss. They abide by the rules, and they're very, very valuable in our workplace. But if the diplomat is left to their own devices, they will make up their own rules, and often their own rules are a little bit bizarre because they actually are designed to seek approval, not necessarily get the job done. So they need to be honoured and respected, but also, and if you're going to change the rules, make sure you consciously help them work through the rules. And also, if they've made the rules up, don't knock and belittle the rules that they've made up. Then you get probably one of the most, troublesome mindsets is the person that's got more of an expert mind, that thinks about their own expertise and procedures and efficiency. These are the type of people that belong to their trade or their profession. So they're very wedded to their identity as being an engineer or an accountant or an AI expert or a nurse, or that becomes their whole sense of who they are. The problem is that their mindset can be inflexible if they don't see you as an expert of equal quality or someone that doesn't have the right power and authority. So my joke with expert type mindsets is that if you want an argument, get expert minds in the room. So if you want an argument and no solutions, get expert minds in the room. Then you've got a movement into what is called the achiever mind. This person starts to think about results, goals, effectiveness, so they can actually start to bring people together, work out how to project plan. There's a whole range of really good, goal setting, achievement driven behaviors in that particular mind. And they're very, very effective people at delivering against projects, but they get very upset if there's goal conflict. So if their goals are being affected by someone else's goals, or you're getting in the way of them being able to achieve their goals, they can get quite upset and antsy. So they're the three sort of conventional mindsets. And once again, on a good day, I could be, say, running out of my achiever mind, but I'm anxious and no one's paying attention to me. And all of a sudden, I've triggered my opportunist mind and I'm becoming more problematic. So the gold standard, I think, for us as managers and leaders, if if we're aspiring to that or currently in those roles, or even I just think as higher functioning human beings, is to move our mindsets and our capabilities and abilities into this next stage, which is the post-conventional stage. And where you are starting to be able to perspective take, you're starting to be able to see things from different perspectives, you're starting to be able to see how systems work. So you start to actually get a much more curious, inquisitive, philosophical, insight-based mind. So you're starting to think about yourself in relationship to a system and interaction with a system. And when I say system, I mean the whole kind of way things work. And then you move into a strategist mindset and you're starting to get a little bit more theoretical. And there aren't many people who are alchemists. And it's funny with these hierarchical kind of models that there's a hybrid of this model that has another stage above the alchemist. So I think you could probably just keep going. But the sweet spot, I think, for us to move into being able to be in VUCA well, be in that volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, is to develop a anchored point of our minds being individualist minds with a touch of the strategist and also a bit of the achiever. So if we can get into those three zones, we become highly, highly effective members of society and also members of organizations. Again, both this model and this model are kind of what I would term heuristics. So they're tools that I use to help people identify where we might go in the conversation. So, for example, I might be working with a client who says, look, I've got my two best engineers are loggerheads. I'll go, okay, they're probably both working out of their expert minds. So let's look at a way of how do we manage that? And it's just to help people understand and to kind of depersonalize it and get them to start working on how they're going to work the system rather than getting seduced into this being a conflict between two individuals. So it's useful. It's a perspective taking tool in itself. So just to kind of highlight here, so the opportunist mind is the primal self, low or no awareness of self or other. The social self, the self-awareness is available but limited. Awareness of others is socially anchored to others. In other words, the diplomat is aware of the people around them so that they can make sure that they've got good friends. The expert mind is socially aware of being a high-quality member of their club or their profession, and the achiever, that they're someone who's known for getting results. And then the system self, that self-awareness and other awareness is notable. And in other words, what I mean by that word notable is it's deliberate and it's learnable, it's always available, and it's purposefully used. So these people go into situations looking for system connections, looking for conflict, looking for competition, looking for the characteristics that system will tell them where they need to go and have the conversations, and therefore how they need to have the conversations. Because each of those mindsets require a slightly different language and a slightly different way of approaching people. So I wanted to now move into some practical kind of applications, and the next two slides will focus in on that. Those theoretical frameworks, as I said, I can spend months and months and months exploring those with people. So please, I know that I've probably overwhelmed with a lot of data tonight, but I wanted to do that to show you just how much there's there and how much we can do in this regard. So now I want to look at, I guess, how do we in organizations get better results when we're in these situations when we constantly seem to be brokering conflict, when we're brokering competition? How do we do that? and for me, some of the common kind of theory or ideas is we need to get rid of conflict, or conflict's bad, or competition's bad. I'm not so sure about that. I think, I mean, whilst conflict can get personal and competition can get nasty in a way that someone wins and someone loses, I think for me, if we understand how conflict and competition works, in other words, we don't enter the competition and the conflict, but we understand how it works, and we can understand between individuals, including ourselves and other people, we can understand perhaps why that's there, then we can start having what I call a contest. In other words, if there's a conflict between Graham and Jill and that's become personal, then I can actually find out some evidence that suggests that I've got to actually stop doing that, and that I need to go and apologize to Jill to chill that conflict down, so I can bring in a less personalized, evidence-based conversation to contest the idea around what we need to be doing. So contest is a cleaner way of using the conflict and the competition, because we're all aiming for what I term cooperation. And cooperation is an interesting concept, because if you look at the word, it's got the word co and operation. And in many organizations, we've got, say, if you look at it, there's probably dozens and dozens of operating intentions. And if our task is to find the co piece, which is how do we connect all of the operating intentions together to get a high quality outcome. So for me, saying to a group of people, we need to cooperate, is kind of almost like, it's almost insulting in a way, because it's an outcome, whereas actually asking where's our conflict and where's our competition, that's a richer way of asking. And you can ask those questions in all sorts of ways. You don't necessarily need to use the word conflict and competition, but to say to people, you know, we need to cooperate on this, we need to collaborate, they're outcomes. We've got to actually find where the conflict and competition is and have the contest in order to create the cooperation. So yeah, as I said, contest leads to cooperation, and competition is when you get a sense that, and you can hear it in language going, yeah, we got that one today. Well, they didn't do the right thing today. We did the right thing. Sort of like that win-lose mentality. And if we're in that cycle all the time, work feels like it's a combat, like you're just constantly kind of exhausted. And as I said, the inputs to conflict are often personal, and competition is more kind of the competition of ideas. So left unregulated, that sort of behavior will cause unbelievable harm in an organization. So if I'm in an organization, I'm looking for why the culture is so bad. I'm looking for how I can identify and understand the conflict and competition and work in the conflict and competition, not then say, I found the conflict and competition, everyone just needs to cooperate. It's not quite as easy as that. And you know, it's the old virtuous cycle on the right-hand side. But as I said, there's a natural tension in between those two. I think we can deliberately move into contest. It's a recognizable tension. And I believe that creativity actually sits in getting yourself really stuck into the conflict and the competition, because it's almost like an abdication of responsibility by saying we just need to cooperate, because you're avoiding what people are actually conflicted about and what they're competing for, because they're often not doing it deliberately. So the key piece as well with the vicious cycle versus the right-hand side is that one will just keep feeding anxiety and it'll just keep, you know, feeding it, whereas the other side tends to allow anxiety to be, you know, managed more productively. So that's all very well and good. We've got a massive theoretical framework. We've got how the mind works. We've got how we self-regulate, you know, a whole range of really cool stuff. And we've got an understanding that conflict and competition is a good thing. how the heck do we then move to, I guess, some more solutions? So I wanted to spend the last sort of 10 minutes or so just going through the next slide, and then I'd like to open it up to people to ask me questions, and we can go through that from there. So moving to some solutions. So I think one of the things that I'm finding organizations are struggling, very much struggling to do, is to design systems for humans to use rather than systems that use humans kind of cycle. And it's going to be an ongoing challenge, I think, with AI, with the casualized workforce. There is going to be a tendency for dehumanization in the workplace as we become more technology focused. So senior leaders or even middle managers, wherever you are in an organization, just being mindful of being human and being as human as you can be, I think is something we can all take some responsibility for. So one of the things that I teach people to do is I teach people to be curious, and curious is like, it's kind of a meta position where you can be curious about yourself, you can be curious about the person in front of you, you can be curious about anything you want. But I think we often will get a little bit too serious, a little bit too judgy, a little bit too linear, a little bit too binary, whereas you can talk about self-reflection, you can talk about mindfulness, you can talk about maybe we need to sit down and pick this problem apart. I just think curiosity is such a natural tool we have that we just need to kind of turn it back on again. I don't know whether school helps us to really embolden that and make it useful to us. It tends to kill it off. So the second one is that we have a great capacity to set expectations. I'm really find expectations problematic, because as soon as you set an expectation, then you set a point for disappointment. Whereas I think because we've got this massive, beautiful brain, we can really do predicting quite sophisticated. So we can make dozens of predictions, and then we can monitor for success and monitor for consequences. So whilst business plans are important and project plans, they still tend to have a fair bit of linearity in them, and they tend to have a bit too much an absence of variance of predictions in them. So I think the more that we move to being able to set predictions and monitor the consequences as we go, the more we can move the way that we're operating on the way. It's a rather bizarre thing I say sometimes, where we've got to think slow but act fast. So if we're doing some good predictive thinking together, we can start potentially flushing out some of the conflict and competition that may well come. Then the third area just sits over the top of all of the stuff that I've been kind of I guess banging on about tonight, and that's about the quality of the conversations that we have. There's fundamentally two types of conversation, and again, there's so much material behind this, but the two types of conversations that I mentioned in the slide are dialogue and discussion. And some of the people who have introduced tonight have heard my work before and have heard me say this, but in Greek, the derivative of the word discussion is to murder the alternatives. So discussion will actually be a very, very good tool of conversation if you're trying to find out who's going to do what by when and how much is it going to cost. Very, very, very effective way of working. But dialogue is about opening something up. It's about listening. It's about suspending your assumptions. It's about understanding your mind traps. It's about understanding and respecting the other person's mind traps. It's about respecting where they are in their development. It's about finding the right language and over the top of that, it's about listening. And not just listening, but hearing as well as listening. And there's a time and place for discussion, and there's a time and place for dialogue. But I think we're very well equipped to smoothly move in and out of those two spaces. A lot of the comments that I get when I start working with groups and teams is that the work I do is very rarely agenda driven. So I don't actually say, this is what we're going to cover today. I'm actually really just interested in trying to get a dialogue going. And the amount of richness that comes out of a 3-hour conversation where people just feel no pressure but just to listen and participate can often be such a cathartic and in many ways a kind of a therapeutic exercise that we can then move to more discursive frameworks. That's a whirlwind tour of some of the tools that I use, some of the methodologies I use, some of the thinking I use, and I love what I do because there's never a day goes by where there's something slightly different, slightly new, slightly nuanced. And it's just amazing just how unaware sometimes how we can be. And I guess as a practitioner of promoting high quality awareness in order to create high quality outcomes, I better be practicing it myself, which I do. And sometimes, you know, I kind of go to sleep a bit and I lose focus, and I've got to really make the effort to come back. So hence why that in my title there, head coach, is in rabbit ears, because I coach from the head but also the heart. But it really is quite a intellectual and sophisticated kind of process I try to put into the work I do, with a very practical and pragmatic outcome around getting stuff done, but also respecting and promoting the humanity in the organization as well. Obviously, some people don't like my work because of those phenomena, but I keep pretty busy. So we've got back to you, Charmaine, I guess, and see if we've got any questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Needed to unmute myself. Thank you. I can see some questions coming through.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to respond to some of those? I can read. Thank you. The first one.
Yep. Yeah, look, the person's asked, would you suggest we deploy discussions and dialogue quite transparently within a team environment, i.e. letting people know the nature of the conversation? Have you seen this work? Yes, absolutely. And I think until you get used to it, there's a great book called The Art of Dialogue by a guy called William Isaacs. And I think as we're getting used to how to talk, putting a label or a name around it is a very, very good idea. So no, I'd definitely say if you're going to deploy a discussion, to claim it that you need to make a decision for these sets of inputs, whereas this is a dialogue, so we need to open it up to opinions and viewpoints. I think that's part of our job as a leader, is to articulate that and guide and navigate that. So yeah, thank you. Hope that answers the question.
There's just another one here, Graham. You spoke about getting trapped by ego. If you work with someone like that, what's a strategy to make them aware of their behavior? And how do you manage that if they're unaware of that behavior?
Yes, depends. I guess if they're on the extreme end of that, I'd absolutely not bring it to their attention. If you've got someone who's on the more alpha male, alpha female level, they're extremely sensitive to feedback that might attack their sense of self and their self-identity. They may well even thank you for it and then kind of pay you back in some way, shape or form. So I worked for a boss once where I knew if I pulled him up on something, I'd get 3 whacks in response to pulling him up once, and I could actually predict it. So I knew jolly well that if I drew to his attention something, then I would pay 1, 2, 3. And I actually kind of had a formula around it. In the end, I just learned to work with it. And I also learned to work with him in a particular way, because often he'd tell you to do something and then 3 days later he'd forgotten about it, or it wasn't important. So I guess it depends on the person. I think my sense is that unless this person's asking for that, or seems to be vulnerable enough to hear that, and the quality of your relationship is good enough, then be very careful with revealing to your boss their foibles if they're an alpha male or female.
Okay, so sometimes the coping strategy would just be your own personal awareness about who they are,
Yes.
and then knowing that, and then utilizing that in the relationship.
Yes.
Thank you. The next question, are there any tips to how we can become more aware of our behaviour and where we fall into the framework?
Yeah, look, I think for me, being aware of the framework means you become aware. So it's like it's unless you've got a reference point like a framework like this, it's very, very difficult to get a sense of how you're thinking. But I sometimes will ask other people, so do you think this thinking sounds okay? And obviously doing that to your boss might not be possible, but finding people who you can kind of run your thinking by, and also starting to pick up some of the signals. People give off lots and lots of signals when your thinking's faulty. Their faces will give it away, their body language, their some people don't give you much room to guess, because they'll just tell you up front. But I think having these reference points and becoming mindful of them and running your thinking through them, and being able to, I guess, ask others about the quality of your analysis and your quality of your thinking, so you can check it. It's a bit like it's this kind of sophisticated bananas in pajamas stuff. You need another banana to help you check your thinking, because it's very difficult to do yourself. Yeah.
I had a worried look on my face then, Graham, but it was not from what you were saying. It was me trying to keep up with the chat. So I just wanted to clarify that. I have another question here. Have you ever met anyone with the alchemist mind, and what is their secret?
Oh, no, honestly, you'd probably say Nelson Mandela in the alchemist space. They tend to be very difficult people to get to know, because they're very difficult to identify. I've got a friend who's kind of got an alchemical piece in his thinking, but he's a pain in the I won't say it, because his thinking just shifts and changes and morphs, and you cannot have a 3-second conversation with him. Everything is philosophical and pulled apart and pushed and amorphous, and they're very, 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 very rare. I've never really met one that's a true alchemist. And I think they also can't work in organizations, because the organization just constrains them too much. So yeah. And I don't think they have a lot of friends, the poor alchemists.
Okay, next question. But sometimes ego decisions may impact on policies, productivity, and welfare of the team.
Yeah.
How can we bring this to management's attention?
Yeah, I think this is where we've got to become quite evidence-based in it goes back to that point around creating good predictions around what may or may not happen. There are workplaces where there's just a blindness to that. And sometimes we've just got to mitigate the results according to the sphere of influence, I guess, and control that we have. So it is very, very difficult to stand up in those environments if they're destructive environments. If they're conversational environments and you can be part of the predictive processing and pre-warn and I guess, help to predict that it may happen and put in place things that mitigate that. I think that's important. But we've just seen, you may well have all been got your heads around some of this robo debt stuff. That's just phenomenal how much how much of the empathy in that organization just eroded over time because the systems, the processes and systems completely and utterly failed. If it gets to the point where the organization has an absence of humanity, then sometimes the best decision is to get out and go somewhere else, unfortunately. But there are cases where that does happen. I tend to get clients to make sure that they're not the whistleblowers, that they look at ways of getting the information to their bosses through multiple channels that don't sound like they're ganging up, that they are very conscious and careful that they don't go to single sources. Like, for example, they don't go to the complaints department, or you just got to be conscious of how those things could well play out and backfire. But yeah, that doesn't kind of quite answer it, because I'd have to know the situation and the context, and also the type of harm, and also how the person feeling that is holding up as well. Because if they're being personally affected, my remit with that person will be to help them build resilience against the system. So yeah, it's tricky, that.
Yeah, it certainly is. Just another question. Thank you, Graham. Great content. I just lead with that because that's what they said. Would you suggest we deploy discussions and dialogue quite transparently within a team environment? That is, letting people know the nature of the conversation. Have you seen this work?
Yeah, we answered that. We covered that off. So yes, very much so. Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Can one fluctuate between mindsets? For example, if they were in a post-conventional mindset, sorry, I'm just losing my place here. If they're in a post-conventional mindset, can they go back down to a conventional mindset? Does the situation idea influence this?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all context driven, and on a bad day, under high levels of anxiety, threat, or sleeplessness, or whatever, then absolutely we can get driven down to a lower order. But the beauty about these models is you can get a sense that that's where you are. So that's the sense that I can get now. I go, oh, okay, my mind's down in the expert mind there. I'm arguing with another expert. Okay, I just need to lift my mind here. Or sometimes, periodically I've gone, oh, well, I'm in my expert mind. Here I go. So yes, absolutely. And it can be quite momentary too. It can be 1 minute to the next, or 1 second to the next. So absolutely, yes.
Did we have any other questions in the chat, team? Am I missing anything? No, I've got one for you, Graham. I like the idea of moving from conflict to contest. Could you suggest some phrases that would help someone move from conflict to cooperation?
Yeah, stop being a prat and get. No, I'm sorry. Look, I think getting quite evidence-based, and when I mean evidence, I mean being able to draw out the story. So say you've got two people in conflict, drawing out the story, drawing out their concerns, drawing out their stressors, but also not being afraid of making a call. A lot of these mediation processes actually miss the points. They tend to they're kind of like quasi-legal processes where they're trying to find someone's the perpetrator and someone's whatever the opposite is, the perpetrator is the victim. Sorry, the victim perpetrator. It's never ever as simple as that. And then there's so I think for me it's trying to get to the bottom of what we're trying to achieve here, rather than how we've got into the mess that we've got in. So it's lifting people's mindset away from the conflict to what do you really want to get where do you want to go with this? Where do you want to, where do we want to be with this? What does the outcome look like? How do we move towards the outcome? And then sometimes not being afraid as a manager, because I think part of our role is to constantly sort of be in that mediation sort of space, or that mitigating space, is not being afraid to actually say to someone, look, on this particular occasion, I'm going with John's idea, not Jill's idea, for these reasons. I think we've gotten to the point where we're trying to make everyone happy. And it's really confusing people. So if we're going to have the contest, then we need to call the contest periodically. And if we can't call the contest, then maybe we need someone in authority to call the contest for us, because we've run out of power and authority. But I sense that in order to create cooperation, I think we're missing the appropriate use of power and authority that we are entitled to use as managers and leaders, as long as it doesn't harm. And people respect that when you say, look, we're not going to go with that, Jill, for these reasons. We're going to go with John's, or vice versa. It's that level of honesty, I guess, that people really appreciate.
Yeah. And again, I guess it's about sort of removing the people from the situation. It's not about the individuals in the situation. It's more about, as you said, the bigger picture, what we're trying to achieve as a team, what the work is, and getting them to refocus on that, rather than it being individual clashes of personality.
Because we're a species that gets subjected to things. Therefore, being objective to things requires a fair bit of effort. So if we're going to have a contest things, we need to be as object as we possibly can to the situation. Yeah.
Just got another comment here. Some people are able to develop an on-off switch with the way they deal with difficult people in work environments. Any techniques to manage?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, on-off switches, they work when the situation is deeply confrontational. But I'd like to see us develop dials rather than switches, where you see some people in that situation they almost are transacting with this particular person until the conflict moves on. So for me, it's an understanding of sometimes being able to turn your empathy down. So the person who's commenting there may well be someone that has a strong sense of empathy for other people. And that can be misappropriate sometimes, because in the situation, you may well need to turn your empathy down in order to push through something, to turn it back on again, turn it back up again. So I think with the way I look at anxiety and empathy is, if we can use them as dials, we can dial the anxiety down and dial the empathy down periodically. That might allow us to be cleaner in the way that we enter a conflict or a situation, and then we can turn it up during the conversation, and then we can turn it down. So the more and more we become aware of how that works in us, the more we can use it in the context that's presented.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? I can't see anything else in the chat. Someone just said, wow, dials are so much better than switches.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Graham. I know, again, we've learnt so much tonight. We will be sharing some takeaway messages, slides, all of those things. We would love you to email us if you have any questions. Again, we have another session next week. So as I said, Graham, thank you so much for your time. And thanks everybody for attending.
Thanks for putting up with a whole blip of information. But I think it will help. It's fairly intuitive. Like when you start reading it, you go, yeah, that makes sense. So just come back at it, or if you want to, or Control Delete and move on.
No, it's a different way to think about it, and I think we need that.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for putting up with me.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.